Welcome back, Richard. It is great to see you again, my friend.
Good morning. Looking forward to
Good.
this one.
Yeah, we're going to continue our conversation from the last podcast about education, and the last one is is schoolwork optional?
Right.
And we're going to continue the conversation because the it sure seems like it sometimes, and in the way that things continue to progress and move through our current lives,
Right.
it's becoming more and more of a problem.
Right. Yeah. One of the most vexing problems as we talk to teachers and parents, one of the most vexing problems facing parents and teachers today is that students are not doing assignments or they're turning assignments in late.
Hmm.
And then they want to negotiate with their teachers and administrators for a second or third or fourth or fifth chance. And this whole idea of non-completion or late work and zeros. I mean, Barney, how many patients a week do you see? Parents who come in and say, my son has 8 zeros. I-
How many times I've been at home and heard that
right.
same situation, and what's crazy, Richard, as again, we're very invested in this topic because of the clients and patients
Right.
and all we see, but it's like the assignments aren't turned in, they're turned in late, and the students are, and you use the word, they're requesting and trying to negotiate with teachers for a second or third chance. It's not even just that. It's like they're expecting
Oh,
a second or third chance.
mhm.
The expectation is that you're going to let them, the teachers are going to let them turn the assignments in late and
Right.
expect that they're going to be allowed to get full credit for whatever they submit.
Right. Right. And so, because we're seeing so much more of this today, and we're experiencing it as clinicians, as teachers, and as parents, we have this interest in why is this happening? And you mentioned the article, is schoolwork optional now? Well, so that article was of interest to us, but that article is about how students are using AI to
Mhm.
complete assignments. But along the way, so we said, well, that's one thing. But along the way, we discovered that number one, this assignment problem is not limited to AI. It's not just that students are using AI. Second, it's not new. This is a problem, I guess, everybody said, well, this started during the pandemic. No, this problem started years before the pandemic, is
Yeah.
what everybody's telling us.
I
But
think the pandemic accelerated it. It
it
was
brought it
it was
into
moving.
sharper focus, and people started paying more attention to it. Then the third thing was this non-completion of assignments and the expectation that you don't have to turn it in as requested or when it's due. We have discovered that it's a symptom of a much larger problem. And
Mhm.
actually, there are two problems. And what we've encountered is that this whole idea of getting zeros, not doing your work, negotiating for a second chance, being forgiven, have it all forgiven, it's okay, you didn't turn it in, nothing bad is going to happen to you. It's actually a symptom of two other problems. One is that it reflects an overall assault on education by not only by political leaders, by elected officials, by parents. There's a great deal of criticism now, and I call it an assault. And public education is being blamed for a lot of things right now. I mean,
Mhm.
it's in ill repute. But
Yeah,
the second thing is there's been a rise in student apathy. So
right.
there are two separate problems that are combining to create a much larger problem. So the first is the assault on public education.
Right. And
And
it's, we have talked many times about the transitions that and the different, reforms and everything that have happened over the years. In the last podcast, we kind of walked through several, huge shifts that happened, and the most recent of which was the pandemic because of everything, all the decisions that were made there. But we talked about, a nation at risk, and we talked about these different things. But from the beginning, when schools were first the way that we think about schools now, the rise of the common schools in the early 1800s, you
Right.
know, from then, schools have been sort of the target place for making changes and the changes that we want to have in society. Again, this is something we've talked about many times. The changes we wanted to make in society tend to start in schools.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's always been the breeding ground for reform.
Right. And when we talk about our public education system, you have to remember that even as far back as Jefferson and Washington, they're saying, well, wait a minute, if we're going to let people do the voting, they better be educated. Okay, so this experiment in democracy, which goes back to the late 1700s and early 1800s, required a citizenry that could understand the issues and then could read about the issues. Well, how do you accomplish that? And both Jefferson and Washington said we have to figure out some way to educate our citizens. And what evolved first in Massachusetts and then spread through the other early states was this idea of a common school. And
Mhm.
the idea was we need to, and the goal of the public school system was to provide educational opportunity. You can't guarantee an education, but
Right.
you can guarantee educational opportunity to any student who wanted one. So
Right.
we will take on, the government will take on the responsibility of providing every child with an opportunity to learn to read and write and do math. And
Right.
this system was free and accessible. And it
Yeah.
was accessible because the school was in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
So the idea of the neighborhood school.
Yeah, I had this interesting conversation with an eighth grader this week, actually, because he was asking about, why do we even have to go to school? He's like, I don't care about any of these other things. I want to build things, or I want to. He wants to work in more construction and more physical type of work. He goes, I don't know why I need to do this. I don't know why we even have this. And so I said, so I talked about, an informed citizenry and that, when you become 18, you're going to want to vote. And so the idea is that you have a fundamental set of knowledge, a fundamental way of thinking that will help you make decisions when you're going to vote or when you're going to raise children or when you're going to, have to, you know, survive in a society, to be able
Right.
to pay bills and all that kind of stuff. And as soon as I explained it like that, I said, and then once you get that education, then you can go and do whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to work in physical or you're going to go to college or whatever. You can go to trade school. You can do all kinds of things. His perspective, oh, okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
But we don't inform kids that that's why they're there,
Right.
and we just say, no, you just have to do it. Well,
Yeah.
most kids are going to resist that.
Yeah, I'm going to make you go to this place that's very
Right.
boring and you're not going to like, and they're going to torment you, so but you have to love it.
Yeah.
So, so this idea of a free and accessible education was considered so critical that by 1918, all the states, I think there were 48 states then, every state had passed compulsory education. They're saying you have to do this, you have to get educated. And by 1950, that was extended to age 16, so about the 10th grade, so part of your high school education. So you had to go to school until you were 16. So so there were, even with that, and even in those years, there were problems with the system, and nobody denies that. Educating all children is an enormous task that most countries don't undertake. We did. Um, but there were problems. One of them, of course, was what Jonathan Kozol wrote a book back in the probably 70s called Savage Inequality, because there were unequal school systems. Some school systems had a lot of money because the people there were wealthy and they paid higher taxes. And some districts were very poor, they had less tax money. And so um, we've tried to equalize the burden, but there were always unequal schools. Some schools that were very good neighborhoods, lots of resources, and other schools were in poor neighborhoods, fewer resources. So there was always some inequality. But there were four things, there were four principles that held this public education system together. And one of them was that it has a public education was seen as being valuable to a
Hmm.
democracy. Second, the common schools provided opportunity to every child, whether you had money or not. Well, you don't have to pay for your education in this
Hmm.
country. Um, it was, and it was the responsibility of elected officials to ensure that schools had the resources they needed. Um, and finally, parents and teachers worked together. Bernie, do you even hear about a PTA anymore?
Hmm.
Every school used to have a PTA. Some were
Hmm.
effective, some were not. I talked to a teacher the other day, and she said that, and this is in a pretty affluent school district, they can't get any parent to to run for PTA president. The woman who's running it has been doing it. She's been doing it so long that her kids are no longer in the school. They've gone on to the next level, whether it's middle school or high school, but nobody else will take it. So she's agreed to serve in that capacity. Because what PTAs used to do is they would work together, parents and teachers would work together to make that school as good as it could possibly be. Okay. So you had
Right.
these four principles, and these principles sort of existed from the beginning of the common school in the 1830s well into the 1980s. They held the system together. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't that the system was never criticized.
Right.
Okay. And I never thought about this before, but Catholics criticized the schools because they were too Protestant.
Hmm.
And so what was the solution? They started their own schools.
Right. Yeah. Well, and not just that, but a lot of people had problems because public education was run by the government,
Right.
and it was provided, resources and everything were provided by the government, and people thought that it should be more like a business. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of the reforms and changes we had in society began in the schools, and so then we started to have issues with integration
Right.
and segregation and all of those kinds of things. And again, remember, those changes in our society began in the schools. I mean, that's those famous photos of
Oh, yeah.
of that integration. Those were all at school.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, you know, it's always been that schools were sort of in the spotlight when it comes to some of these major criticisms.
That's right. We use schools to accomplish social goals. So when the country decided that we would, after World War II, that we should integrate a society, where did it begin? It didn't begin in restaurants and lunch counters.
Right.
It began in schools. Okay,
Right.
that's what we were gonna use schools to accomplish this goal, and we've seen that over and over and over across these years. And then so schools were too Protestant, or they were too white, or and finally it was the schools were ineffective. In
Hmm.
fact, they were so ineffective that during the Reagan administration, we talked about this last week, a little pamphlet was written called A Nation at Risk. The schools were so ineffective that it was actually putting our country at risk for falling behind economically or militarily or whatever. That's not, as it turns out, that's not really what the nation at risk concluded, but it was what we were told was going to happen. So there have been these criticisms. Um, the effort to integrate schools led to white academies, segregation academies, if you go throughout the South. Um, Up north, it was busing. People
Hmm.
remember all the ills around, all the problems around busing. So there have been criticisms for years about the public school system. But while there were groups or individuals who took issue with public education, none of them sought to destroy it. No, in the South, integrated schools were not meant to destroy the public school system. Catholic schools were not meant to destroy the public school system. Nobody
Right.
was seeking to destroy the public school system. By contrast, today's critics want are seeking to dismantle the public
Right.
school system. For some reason or reasons, they see public education as some sort of evil force that is now damaging or brainwashing or doing something bad to kids.
Right. Yeah. And so today's schools are being attacked. And I think that this brings us back to, the challenge that we're having with, we began the conversation with, is schoolwork optional? What's happening is these attempts by some people to dismantle and tear apart the education system, the public education system as we see it. Um, because they're accusing them of brainwashing students or being ineffective, or the whole being woke thing, and all of these different issues. Um, Students hear those things. I think students
Right.
hear those
And
things.
other things.
They hear that, and then they're like, so why, if nobody else is taking this place serious, why should I take this place serious?
That is exactly, I think that's exactly what happened is that they hear elected officials, presidents,
Mhm.
governors, whoever, criticizing, damning the public school system, and they're saying, "Oh, I guess it is no,
Well,
I
not
guess
just
you're right. It is bad. It's no good."
right, and not just them, but their parents.
Parents are doing
When parents. I'm sorry, but when a parent undermines a teacher, your kids know that the teacher has. You're saying that the teacher has no power. The
it. Right,
teacher has no authority, no responsibility. The teacher has all the responsibility of teaching your kids. They have all the responsibility of making sure that they gain these skills, but they have no authority to make your kids do anything to achieve that.
right.
So they're responsible for making sure that for them learning, but they
Mhm.
have no position, no grounds to stand on to say, no, you have to do this work because this work is going to make sure that you learn it. And so I don't know what people want teachers to do.
Right. Yeah.
It
If your
doesn't make
teachers,
sense.
yeah, if your teacher is assigning the work, then it's your responsibility to do it. Well, that
Period.
doesn't exist anymore.
No.
Now teachers are questioned, they're threatened, they're criticized. And we have often said whatever exists outside the school will exist inside the school.
Right.
Well, if outside the school is criticizing the public school system, then inside is going to be criticizing the public school system. You can't have it
Absolutely.
both ways. You can't bash the public school system and then tell your kids to respect the teachers and the principals. Okay. You can't have both.
Right.
So, it wasn't so long. I think it was the first President Bush ran as the education president. He was proud to campaign, say, I'm gonna do everything I can to fix the educational system. It was not so long ago that candidates campaigned on the
Mhm.
promise that they would be the education president or the education governor or the education mayor. What are politicians running on today? We got to dismantle the public school system because it's too woke, or it's too this, or it's brainwashing kids, or it's bad, it's godless. No, it's none of those things.
Right.
So while elected officials once accepted responsibility to improve education, elected officials now, many of them, are the harshest and most vocal critics of the educational system. And they're creating policies that not only don't improve the system, they actually damage the system. And these are not accidental. When you talk about cutting taxes, and we hear politicians say, I'm going to cut taxes, we're going to cut taxes. What gets cut?
Mhm.
Education, police, fire, public service, feeding children. That's what gets cut.
Right.
Yeah, is that really what you want? If you cut taxes, you have less money for schools. If you have less money for schools, schools are not going to work as well.
Right.
Second, we're
And it
designing.
creates a two-tiered system. And we've talked about the two-tiered system for years, that you have schools who have the resources,
Right,
do very well, make great grades, for the district and for the state. But then a mile away, you have a school who doesn't have the resources. They don't, and there's a clear disparity in difference in the population, the
right,
the demographics of the students.
right.
There are clear differences between the two, and
Mhm.
so you have one group of schools that succeed and do very well. And people will look at those and say, see, they can do it. Why can't everybody else do it? Then you have these other schools that they can't even te keep teachers.
Right, exactly. Right. That's right. In our community, in every community, not ours, in every community, we've created magnet schools and charter schools, and they have the ability to function differently.
Right,
You can create a very effective school if you're deciding which students you keep and which ones you get rid of. If you can get rid of the students who are underachieving or misbehaving, you're at a distinct disadvantage, and it creates the haves and the have-nots. Some
right.
schools are very high performing, some schools are very low performing.
Hmm.
The effort should be to make all schools perform well. Okay,
Hmm.
so number one, you cut taxes. Number two, you design a two-tiered school system. Number three, in several states now, we have the voucher system. Okay.
Which makes me, it makes me insane because I totally get that parents want to take advantage of this system. And I don't mean take
Right.
advantage of it in a
Right.
bad way. I mean that the opportunity is there and they want to take that opportunity. And so they try to get the funding. But, you know, I just wish that people would understand that that it doesn't work the way that they think it's the way that it's proposed to work.
Right.
Just because you have a voucher and the state is going to give you $8,000 to put your kid into a private school or do whatever, there are still limited spaces. There are still limited spaces in private schools. So
Right.
every student that's in public school can't go to a private school.
Right.
And B, um, all the private school has to do is increase their tuition.
Mhm.
If the tuition was $8,000 and now all of a sudden every student in the state has $8,000 that they could use to come to your school, they're going to raise their tuition to 15,000.
And Bernie, it's happened in our community. If a
Yeah.
private school charges $15,000 for tuition, which is not unreasonable, I mean, that's okay.
It's
It's
not unheard of,
right.
certainly.
If I have 8,000, say you give me $8,000, I still have to have another 7,000 to
Right.
send the kid there. So
Right.
this doesn't help most people.
Right.
But if you
Because
do
before
have
the
the money,
vouchers, there were parents that were paying the whatever it was before, and now
right,
you're giving them $8,000 off of whatever the tuition was. So
they're
whatever
getting,
they increased the tuition to, they can still handle it because they were paying more than that from before anyways.
and you're essentially handing them $8,000 that they paid the year before, but they don't
Yeah.
have to, now they have $8,000 of free money that they can do whatever they
Hmm.
want to do with it. Um, so vouchers help some people, but they take away from this idea that we have to provide an education for everybody, not just the
Hmm.
people who can afford it. So, and then you have the charter privilege. Charter schools used to be places where we could experiment with new policies because you didn't have restrictions. Now they've become academies where they can select the students and do what kind of what they want to do. And so it provides privileges to some, but starves others. In our state right now, we are giving a charter school company free space in a public school, free transportation.
Hmm.
These are for-profit charter schools that are given at taxpayers' expense free space in schools
Hmm.
and free transportation.
Yeah, and part of that is through because of the way the vouchers are working and everything. And I am going to say one more thing about the vouchers because I don't, once again, I don't think that people appreciate this. Um, we already have a teacher shortage.
Right,
I don't know that there's a district here in Florida or in the state in the country that doesn't have a teacher shortage.
right.
If you have a school of, I don't know, say 500 students, if 10 students
Hmm.
use a voucher and go to either a private school or become homeschooled, if 10 students, that's at least that's the equivalent of at least one teacher position that they will lose funding for. They'll lose $80,000 because it's about $8,000 a student. That's $80,000 that the school is no longer going to get.
Right, right,
That's at least one teacher position that they're going to lose.
right. And
So, as you can imagine, the more students that do this, the more teacher positions there's just not going to be funding for.
that's
And we
right.
could say, oh, well, it comes out of a different bucket and it does. there's still only a finite amount of money that is allocated to schools.
Mhm.
And so they're either going to lose a teacher position, or they're going to lose the computers that they need, or they're going to lose the custodial positions that they need because that is critical in a school.
Mhm.
They're going to lose all the support systems that they need. They're going to lose something. $80,000 is a lot of money when you're talking about the day-to-day functioning of a school.
For most schools. There's a county near another county in Central Florida, and they're already being told how many teacher positions they're going to lose next year because as the student enrollment count goes down, your monies are reduced by that percentage. And
Yeah,
so schools are already being told, we're not going to have as many teachers next year, and you're just going to have to do without. Okay.
right.
So
Yeah,
it's already happening. So we're sort of dismantling the system from within. Okay. Instead of elected officials doing things to improve education, they're doing things that really advantage a small group who can take advantage of these things, and at the expense of everybody else.
right.
So are we seeing the end of public education? That's the question is with all this, are we seeing the end of public education? You remember, of course you remember No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
I didn't
Oh, no
like
problem.
most of that
Right,
law, okay?
right.
It had major flaws, I mean, huge flaws.
Well, it looked good and sounded good with the talking points. We're going to
Right,
make sure every student is at grade level by the end of third grade in
right,
reading, at least. That sounds terrific.
right,
As long as you don't take into consideration standard deviations and the way that,
right,
the way that learning works, that sounds great.
right. Yeah, but at least No Child Left Behind, as the name implies, is we're talking about all children. Let's get all children up to grade level. It was a noble aspirational goal. But it tried to the goal was to improve everybody's education. By contrast, today's what are called reforms, we're going to reform the public school system, provides advantages for a few, but it
Mhm.
reduces resources and takes all this money and reduces funding to public schools. Now you say, well, maybe they should be defunded. Yeah, well, even with all that's going on, public schools provide education for 90% of kids. Okay.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
doing the work. They're doing
Yeah.
the lifting.
So, like as you said, I think that what's happening is less that the school, public school system is collapsing and is going to be completely done away with. It's more of a transition. It's transitioning to something new. Not necessarily exactly sure what that new is.
It,
It's certainly shifting away from what we have traditionally known as the school system into something different. But
right.
it's more of a transition than it is because there's no way it's going to go. There's no way that we can allow it to go away completely because, as you said, the vast majority of kids are educated through public school. I mean,
That's
there
right.
is no way that there could ever be enough private schools to educate all students if
But
that's going to
Bernie,
continue to be our value.
but let's say we create enough private schools to educate all children. What's changed?
Right,
It's the private schools can't do any better than the public. The problems that arrive in our public schools, whether it's student behavior, underachievement, uh, iPhones, computer, doesn't video games, they all they're going to exist
right,
wherever the kids are. Just because you put the kids in a different place, it doesn't solve those problems.
right.
So if you have private schools educating all children, you're going to have all the same problems.
Well, and as we're wrapping up this podcast, we will kind of present the what I think you're saying there is that students at private schools tend to turn their homework in anecdotally.
Right.
I don't know if there's been a research study to really look at this to see what the statistics really are, but anecdotally, it appears as though students that go to private schools tend to turn their homework assignments in on a more regular basis.
Right. Right.
I think that the reason for that is probably twofold. One, I think that there's more parents of students in private schools that do their homework for their kids. I'm just going to say that. Yep, that's going to get a lot of things thrown
That
at me.
may get some listener response,
Yeah. So there's that. But two, private schools can kick your kids out.
right? If they don't do
So,
the work,
so there's a different pressure. Public schools can't kick kids out
right?
for in that way. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll kick you out of this school, but you got to go to another school, and it's going to be the same expectations. Um, so kids who go to private schools because of probably the pressure from their parents, probably from, other pressures, they want to be able to stay there. The students who don't turn their work in are the students that don't want to be at that school.
Right. That's right.
I've had there's a couple of really prominent private schools here in our district, and I have a number of patients who stopped doing their work at those schools, and when you talk to them, they want to go to a different school. They don't want to go to that school, and so they know that if they don't do their work, that eventually they're going to get kicked out, and then they're going to be able to go to the school they want to go to. Now, that's manipulation and all that kind of stuff. We can talk about all the problems with that, but it doesn't refute the idea that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So private schools can do things a little bit differently than public schools, but it's because there's a different consequences at private schools than there are at public schools.
And today what we hear, I like the idea of fragmentation. It's this marketplace. You can go out and get the best. You can go out and find the best education. No, you can't. Okay,
Right,
that's a myth. Second, this idea of school choice. School choice is not meant to improve education. School choice is just moving the pieces around. You're just taking your kid from this school and putting her in this school.
right,
That has nothing, that doesn't improve education. It just moves kids. You're moving the chess pieces. That's all. None of this is designed to improve the educational system. It's
right,
meant to shift kids around, and not all kids can be shifted.
right.
This Not everybody has school choice. The privileged have school choice.
Mhm.
Those who need it the most do not have school choice. You're going to go to the
Right.
school in the neighborhood.
And just redistributing kids to from this school to that school and changing some of that doesn't change or address the issue that we're talking about of the student apathy, the lack of engagement, the distractibility, the not turning in the work, the certainly the achievement gap between those students, the haves and the have-nots. There is an achievement gap difference there that is based largely on socioeconomic status. I
Right.
mean, let's be honest. There's a huge difference in just reading scores based upon your socioeconomic demographics.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with what's happening in your school. You can control for all of that, but just look at socioeconomic status, and there's a difference.
Back in the 1960s and 70s, the research was very clear. It said, what's the best predictor of student achievement? Mother's education. That
Right,
hasn't changed.
right,
That's still the best predictor of it. It's not a private school. It's not a charter school. It's not a bank. It is the parents' education and income.
right.
That's what determines educational proficiency. And so by giving school choice, you're giving choice to those who are privileged, who are already, and I don't mean economically privileged. I mean, they have the ability to
Mhm.
manage the system. Most parents don't.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that's it for today. We're going to be back and we're going to do part three of this. Why not? Let's talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, until next time.
More to discuss. Mhm.
Yes. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.